Cycle Jerks.
Hey, get out of the road, dummy.
Cycle Jerks Podcast.
All right, welcome everybody to Cycle Jerks Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Stewart, and today we have a special guest, Krista Halling, who is a veterinarian and also hosts the website dogpacking.com. And so, Krista, welcome to the podcast.
Mike, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing tips and tricks to all of your audience who's keen on getting outdoors with their dog.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have a couple golden doodles at the house, and we love them so much. But we sometimes we take them on adventures, and a lot of times they come back with little nicks or injuries. And I've been looking at your website, and there's a lot of really useful information there. And how did you get started with this idea of obviously being a veterinarian, you're dealing with dogs on a regular basis. Is that kind of what started it?
That was part of it. I've always been outdoorsy and done things on my own with my dogs. And in exam rooms, owner would often ask, how can I get back to hiking after an orthopedic injury, for instance, and how much can I do? And then a couple of years ago, I started bringing my dog along on bike rides, and it just seemed like there's a lot of information and more, especially after COVID. So many people have dogs and so many people are trying to connect again with nature. And really the best thing is if you and your dog head out together and do something active in nature, there are so many benefits to both you and your dog, physically and emotionally. So I just wanted to create a resource. And at the time, and I think that's still the case, there wasn't a dedicated resource with science-based information on how to get out and do activities with your dog.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I know during COVID, we certainly all in the bike business, we really enjoyed a big boom. It was at the expense, unfortunately, of the general public. They weren't able to do much else. You couldn't go to the movies, you couldn't travel, weddings, all that stuff got postponed. But the bicycle was available. And so we had a lot of people that were new to cycling that got into the sport. And then trying to incorporate their dog, get their dog out while they're doing it. Yeah, it is a little tricky though. The trips to the vet can be a little expensive. And so, yeah, what would you recommend if somebody was, you know, let's say they want to take their dog out for a mountain bike ride? How would you recommend getting started with something like that?
Yeah, what I suggest, I mean, generally to get started with anything, start where you are is the best policy to get you going, because otherwise you've got inertia. And if you're thinking the first step is a huge one, you probably won't do it. So rather than starting with this list of gear that someone should get or a new bike, although I'm sure your audience wants an excuse to get a new bike. So this is an excellent excuse, by the way, to get a new bike. But in terms of getting outside, there are a couple ways to do it. One is start with what you have. So it can be your existing bike and your existing dog. Whether you decide to trade either of those in, that's up to you in the future. But start with that pair and then consider, how is that going to look? Is the dog going to be trained to run beside your bike, or are you going longer and maybe your friend should be on your bike or in a trailer behind your bike? So sort of figure that out. There are some pros and cons to both. If it's a short enough trip, I've got a friend who just does local trails and her dogs just run beside the bike, and that's fine because she's going a little bit faster, which is better workout for a dog than if you're with someone who's walking or jogging. They've got a much higher aerobic capacity. So for them, that's not a workout. If you've been running and you look down and your dog's going along and looks like it's barely being tired, that's because it's not. So it's a really good workout for a dog to run beside a bike if done safely, but it's also nice to let them have a break and pop up in a basket or in a trailer. So yeah, just picture what they can do. If they want to stay with their existing bike, that's where a trailer comes in, because unless you've got a rear rack that is of suitable size and weight capacity for the dog you're planning on putting in there, a trailer you can hook up to any existing bike.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like certainly just starting out, you really don't know what you're capable of and what the dog is capable of in terms of if you were in a situation where the dog was done and they're just laying on the side of the trail and they're not moving, and you've got 3 miles to get back to your car or something. So then you got to try to load them in the, I would imagine it's probably best to start with a trailer so you have an out if you run into a situation like that. There's all kinds of things that can happen too. I mean, there's, just recognizing when your dog may need water and if they're getting dehydrated, that could cause them to conk out a little early and then force you again into the situation where you have your bike and your dog and it's hard to get back. So I think probably starting out would be great to have a trailer just as a fail safe and you can kind of figure it's kind of like when you get an e-bike, you don't really know how far you can go and make your whole trip, but at least with a trailer, you have the out. So if the dog is not interested in I know there's been times, not with the current dogs I have. So we have these golden doodles. They're like 80 pounds. I call them the lions. These things are wild. We love them to death, but they're just a lot. And but we before that we had cockapoos, and I remember there were times where I'd be walking the cockapoo, and he was done walking, so he would just, and then it's just you had to deal with it, you know, and so
Yeah.
you
And
pick him up
cockatoos you
and
can
take him.
carry. Yeah.
But he was only 15 pounds or whatever,
Yeah.
so it's a lot easier. With the doodles, thankfully, we haven't run into that yet, but there is probably a risk because I know, like, we take them to the dog park and I mean, they just go and it's fun to watch and and they love it and we love it. It's super fun, but they do get tuckered out pretty quick. And then from there, they're just kind of walking slow. But you can see on a bike where if you were to cover, let's say 10 miles or something, which is a pretty modest mountain bike ride, um, that's a lot for your dog, to try to tackle. So, and what do you think about the paw covers? We've all seen those viral videos with the dogs, you know, with happy feet or whatever when you first put them on, but they adjust to that. But is that a good solution in general?
The booties.
Yeah, the booties.
Yeah, excellent that you brought that up. So dogs normally by default are barefoot, and their foot pads actually are a form of protection. They're padding, so they're shock absorbers and they're protection. They're not full protection. So if something's too hot, too cold, or too sharp, then you may risk injury. And when I say too hot, even sand can get too hot. So if it's too hot for you to walk barefoot on, it's too hot for
Mhm.
your dogs. Yeah. So generally, I prefer to let a dog just go barefoot unless the ground is those rules: too hot, too cold, too sharp, or if the dog's not trained for that particular terrain. So the foot pads offer a fair bit of protection, but they get soft just like our feet. If you haven't walked barefoot for a while, you don't try going over anything a bit, a
Yeah.
little bit prickly or sharp. So you do need to customize your dog to that. So for instance, if your dog's used to doing a lot of running around in the local park that's probably grass, if you do the math of like what that distance might be, it doesn't translate to doing that on pavement. You can't suddenly make that transfer because you risk injuring the paws by doing too much too soon. The benefit, so the pros and cons of those booties, the benefits of not wearing them is that it allows your dog to naturally develop their own system, their own protection with their foot pads. So that's going to give them less injury prone feet. It also gives excellent feedback to their feet. So there's something called proprioception, which means you know where your body parts are in space. Like if you close your eyes, you can still clap because you know where your feet are and you know where your hands are. The same with a dog. So that feedback, and like us, if we're walking on trails, it's really important to have that feedback directly from the ground to their paws because it makes these little micro adjustments and it just keeps your dog, that system tuned up. If you put boots on, now you've got a layer of artificial protection. And so probably the similar drawbacks to people wearing too much protection and super cushy running shoes, the same thing. It does change your gait and it changes the proprioceptive feedback. So by and large, to answer your question, I go barefoot with River unless it looks like her feet are going to get into trouble. If there's a recent wound, for sure, then I'm careful about it. But otherwise, if the ground's not sharp, and by that, it's not just we're not necessarily talking lava rocks, but if there might be If you're in cactus territory, for instance, like anything that they do need a little bit of protection from what might injure them on the ground itself, then that would be a good idea. But keep in mind, you're switching one problem for another. So the boots, a lot of people complain that they fall off. And of course they do, because it's like putting it on a paper towel roll and then swinging the paper towel roll around. Their feet are pretty straight. So I don't blame boot companies. Really hard to keep something on. Socks will help from an abrasion rubbing perspective. They definitely can have the equivalent of blisters. They can have sore spots, and those can build up very quickly without the dog saying anything.
Oh,
So yeah, if I wear boots or put them on River, it's just transient. It's till we're done the period where she shouldn't be on. If there's a really long stretch that she needs to be wearing boots, then I have to wonder, why am I taking her to an area where there's a long stretch where she needs to wear boots? So I'm pretty cautious because they can cause more damage than good. They're good things. I'm not damning companies that make them. I think they do a very good job for what they're making. But I prefer feet to be natural unless we need to protect them. And then the other thing to keep in mind, if feet are wet, the skin becomes soft. So your dog's feet are going to be far less able to resist abrasion, like tearing and rubbing, either in a boot, if they're in a wet boot, or if they're just running on super wet ground. So if the ground is harsh and they're running on it for a longer period, that can really do a lot of damage to foot pads. So just something to keep in mind, meaning be cognizant of the territory and the terrain and the duration that your dog's going to be on it, and just visually check the paws before and after. On that note, foot pad balm and foot pad wax are helpful. The difference being the wax, like Musher's Secret, is a bit of a protective barrier. So it doesn't get absorbed, like it's not like a hand lotion. And that can be helpful if you want your dog to go barefoot and want a little bit of protection.
mhm.
Something advertised as a foot pad balm is like a hand cream, and that softens the foot pad, which is okay thing to do in the evening. It's probably not the best thing to do right before a long hike, because if they're soft, they might get a bit injured. But it's also not serving as strict protection. So just to keep that in mind.
Okay. And to get started with the dog like I feel pretty confident with our dogs, with in terms of them sticking with us. But they do, if there's a squirrel or there's some kind of animal, they can be unpredictable. And so, I don't think this is unique to these two dogs that we have. So when you're starting out, how would you recommend dealing with that? Is there a way to tether the dog to the bike that's safe for both? Or do you recommend not doing that at all? Or what's your thoughts on that?
That's a good question you bring out because it's so intuitive. If your dog is in, so I have not personally used a bike trailer, so I can't speak to the ins and outs specifically of that experience, but just other than in theory. So if we start with a basket on a bike, which is something that's more familiar to me,
Yeah.
intuitively you think, oh, I better keep the dog chained, secured, tethered to this so it can't leave. Best to train the dog not to jump out. We can get to that in a minute. But the concern is a long leash attached to you is probably a good idea. But something short so they can't leave the basket is a problem, because there is one way to definitely leave the basket, and that's if the bike dumps.
Right.
And if the bike dumps and the dog has a very short tether, it can't jump out of the way. And it probably, it's just at risk of getting mixed up in this heap of pickup straws, that fall down, and maybe it's partially out and partially not, and the bike lands on it, or it gets its foot caught in something. So best that it be able to just jump out of the way as the bike starts going down. Dogs are smart; they abandon ship, so it will jump out of the way. You just need to make sure that you've given it enough slack of a leash that it can do that and get out of the way. Yeah,
Okay.
so that's what I do. I ride with River on a leash that she's beside me, and it's just short enough that she cannot get in front of the front wheel. She's sort of learned that's not a good place to go, but from a responsibility standpoint, I don't want that to physically be possible.
Right. So you'll actually hold the leash, one hand on the handlebar, one hand on the leash, and River will run alongside you that way.
I actually use one looped around, like around the hip harness.
Oh, okay.
The hands-free ones, that's a little bit better. Then it's your body that they are pulling against, and you've got a bit more control. Otherwise, I think if you were to just loop it around your hand on your bars, then first you've got a long lever arm because they're pulling your hand, which is pretty far away from your body.
Yep.
So that's a bit hard to quickly negate, right? To counter.
Yep.
And secondly, it's attached to the steering mechanism. So, you could risk suddenly twisting that. Yeah, so I have it. It's just a hands-free model. This happens to be a bungee one from Roughwear, but many companies offer that.
So
Bungee is nice if you've got a dog that you want to start training to hop down, but that's where you just have to be a bit careful if you're going to be doing that.
okay, so this is like around you wear it like a belt around your waist. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And then there's enough slack. So this one is, I think it's 4 feet and it extends to 6 feet, something like that.
Okay.
Um, and by that I mean when bungee is operational, or over time, the elastic wears and it just sort of extends almost to that on its own. But yeah, that's the idea, just to give them enough that if the bike topples, they can hop out, and enough that they can ride, they can run beside the bike, ideally on the side opposite traffic, so that they're just used to that's the only way they ever descend, and that's the only place they ever run. And then so then your bike is between traffic and your dog. And
Yeah.
then yeah, just make sure it's not long enough that they get out too far ahead, because they might see something and dart in front of your wheel. That would be my concern. And when you said, it was a good comment about dogs running after things and can be unpredictable,
Yeah.
I would say the flip side, I would challenge you a little bit there, that actually I'd say they can be predictable. In other words, I think it's predictable that they can
Yeah.
go and suddenly, without notice, do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I keep my dog on a leash for that reason, mainly because I often don't do a lot of backcountry trips with her. We're usually on rail trails or somewhere where we're probably going to come across someone else, and they probably don't want a little fluffy dog running up to them, greeting them, or maybe they've got a dog that is not friendly with other dogs. So just from that standpoint, I'd like to keep her near me.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. And I was looking on the site and it looks like I think it's your bike that has that milk crate kind of basket on your bike. So how do you get the dog in and out of there? Does it jump into that, or do you actually lift him up into that?
Yeah, depending on the height of the basket and the size of your dog and how trained they are for that. And so what you're referring to is, it looks like an extended, like a rectangular shaped milk crate. The one I have is collapsible. It's just I think a fruit crate from
Okay.
Amazon, and it collapses because I've got a folding bike that collapses and a dog that folds up as well. So it's easy for traveling. But it's something that you'll see pretty commonly. A lot of people have either that sort of setup either in front of the steering column or on the rear rack. And in terms of getting in and out, if we take a step back, if you're considering doing that for your dog, some of these come in, they sell them in sets of three, because they figure if you need a crate, you probably need three crates for some reason. But if you have more than one, you can secure one to your bike and then have another one inside the house in the area where you normally hang out. And so your dog has, oh, look at this. I have a new bed. And if you just make it a super fun place, and padding is key for this, it should be small enough that when your dog is lying in it, curled up, they're touching pretty much all the edges. If you picture being in a roller coaster, if that area were pretty loose, you're just going to be slamming around as you go around turns and such. And so for them, not having a seat belt when they're sitting up, yeah, it's going to be a little bit loose. But the idea is if they're lying down, they should feel pretty secure, and just mechanically they should technically be secure as well. So a lot of padding, and then make it small enough that it's not like a big bathtub. It should fit more like a kayak, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. But get them used to it in the house. And once that's a positive place for them and they're hanging out, then I just put River in the one on the bike, and it was a stationary bike, and the bike was stationary. It wasn't a stationary bike.
Yeah.
And she just hung out there for a while. And then we did some trips around the driveway, and that seemed fine. And then I took her into the park so that if she did hop out, it would be onto grass, not onto asphalt or concrete or traffic.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, I never really thought about it like that. That's an interesting point about having it small enough to where they're going to be supported on all four sides, so they're not moving around, they're just comfortable in that space.
Well,
Um,
comfortable is right. They're secure, but they will feel comfortable. Dogs like that tightness. They won't feel gypped. They won't say like this is it. You didn't get me like the luxury size. They will enjoy having that security.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I have some experience. So with my cockapoos, I had, um, I'm really into climbing. And so I had this idea that I got a backpack for my dog. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go do hill repeats with the dog on my back. And it's going to be good for me. And my dog's going to love it, you know? And what I realized is like, it's so much harder, even just 15 pounds on your back, trying to do, something, let's say, performance related. It was very challenging. And, it seemed like she really loved it. Like I got the feeling that she was really loving it, and she would put her paws, one paw on each side
Mhm.
of my shoulders, and then sometimes she'd like rest her head right up against me, and it was so nice, it just gave me all these really good feels, and I was just thinking, oh, she loves this. And then we would I ha- we my wife and I have e-bikes that we use for Sunday, just going grocery shopping or whatever. But I would take Maggie with me in the backpack, and again, like I said, it seemed like she really liked it. But then at one point, when I went to, she would be excited about the backpack. I'd pull it down, and then she'd climb in, and then I'd fasten her up. And then at one point, I pulled the backpack down, and she didn't want to get in it. And then I tried to
Hmm.
get her in it, and then she started like whimpering. And so then it was just like, oh, okay, well, she doesn't want to get in the backpack for whatever reason. So we have a basket on the bike. So we put like a blanket down on the bottom of the basket just to make it like comfy. And then we put her in the basket. And then but to your point, I had her leashed to my handlebar because I was afraid having not done that before with her, we were riding
Yeah.
downtown with cars and stuff. And so
Mhm.
I tied it up kind of tight on the handlebar so she could move around a little bit in the basket, but she couldn't jump out. Well, sure enough, we're at this stoplight. We're waiting, and this car pulls up next to me. Had this cute little dog in it. They roll down the windows, and then Maggie decides she's going to jump off the.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and that my leash was so short that I kind of hung her.
Mm.
Thankfully, we were
Right.
stopped, and I was able to quickly move the bike down to where she was able to be down on the ground. But had
Yeah.
we been rolling or something, that would have been terrible. And it wasn't great, even stopped. But thankfully, she didn't get hurt or anything. But we felt bad, and then we had to rethink everything. It's like, oh, geez. So yeah, it's a little bit tricky depending on your dog and how to really get started with it. So I think that's where your website and your Instagram page can really help everybody find ways to get comfortable. I'm curious. So let's say you're out on your bike for, let's say, an hour. If you're out with your dog, how much time would you say your dog is on the bike versus off the bike?
For that, I'd say when I said start with where you are and what you have, that also includes where the dog is conditioning wise.
Hmm.
So that answer will completely depend on what that dog's body is used to doing. And if you picture us, like for us to do a 10K race, we don't start with 1 kilometer and then the next day do 10K. So dogs develop the same way as we do from a conditioning perspective. It's like the carrot in front of the donkey in that you're as fit as what you have last been doing, is what your body is accustomed to doing.
Yeah.
So if you do 3 push-ups, you'll be as strong as someone who does 3 push-ups. But if you
Uh-huh.
want to be stronger, you don't do 20 push-ups, because then you risk injury. So if what you're doing is a surprise for the body, that's when you get injured. The general rule, we'll say in numbers, but just in principle, is I like to to tell dog owners, whatever you're about to do with your dog, think of whether it's likely going to be a surprise to your dog's body. And by that, and usually you have an intuitive thought of, oh yeah, this is going to surprise the heck out of it because it's completely different than what we've done before. You generally have a good just gut feeling about that answer. So specifically, the different ways this could be difficult is duration, like how long are you going? Um, Speed, how fast are you going? And then the actual like intensity or difficulty level, meaning are you doing something flat or are you guys doing hill intervals and or deep grass, which is harder to go through, for instance. And so if you're translating from one to another, like if your dog's used to doing 5 kilometers and you decide um, on a particular trail, and it's fairly flat or maybe a little bit rolling, and then you're going to do something that's super hilly, I would think, okay, we're going to go from 5 kilometers or of flat or fairly easy to now something where the difficulty level has gone up. So sometimes you actually want to reduce the speed or reduce the duration, if that makes sense. So you've got speed, duration, and like terrain intensity.
Mhm.
And you can increase from 1 week to another with regular intervals, not just by sitting around. But if you go out 2 or 3 times during a week, for instance, the next week you can go up by about 10% in one of those.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you think the dog might struggle, then maybe dial down the two others. It's sort of like a dashboard where you've got three dials on there. And if you're turning one of them up, maybe just turn the others down a bit. Oh, today what we're doing is super hilly. Then we're not, your body's capable of 10 miles, or it would be smaller than that, let's say 3 miles, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go 2 miles. If that makes sense, of like how much you want the dog to be running, walking, whatever you're asking their body to do, it can be a little bit longer, a little bit faster, or a little bit harder, but it shouldn't be a lot longer, a lot faster, or a lot harder.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like I don't know if you've seen any of these videos, but like if you ever get on like Pink Bike or Vital or something where it's like these mountain bike videos and you see these dogs, these trail dogs, and they are incredible. They're just bombing down these hills or jumping over jumps, and it's super cool. And I think that a lot of people that are into mountain biking think like, oh, I want to do that, I want my dog to be like that. But to your point, it's like those dogs, didn't just it didn't happen just all of a sudden. Like you got this dog, you took it out, and now it's bombing down the hill with you. It's a evolutionary process, kind of like your own self as a writer.
Mhm.
Most writers don't get to that level either.
That's right.
It's a
Zero to
process.
hero.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The zero to hero moments. That's what I've spent my career putting back together. I do surgery and orthopedics, so they
Okay.
come to see me when
Oh, boy.
when they've gone, a little bit too much too soon. We'll
Right.
do it. Generally, this is like I don't want your audience to think they're going to break their dog, because generally this is a super safe thing to do, and stuff can come up. But it's a matter of just sort of thinking ahead of like, what are you about to ask your dog to do? Is this familiar to your dog's brain? And if it's too novel, they may not feel secure. They might feel nervous. And if to the body it's too foreign, suddenly way faster, way more explosive, um, way harder, way longer, then you're not setting them up for success. But to your point about those fun videos, some of them are in slow motion where the dog just comes
Yeah.
flying off, and like it seems like a minute later, 50 feet later, it lands. Yeah, that I mean, we don't see what happens after the video, but assuming the dog ends up being fine, ideally what you want for that level of fitness is to have super strong core strength. We won't do a deep dive now, but on our website for those interested, there's an article, it's science based, on the 5 pillars of canine fitness. Because if you think, oh, my dog's pretty fit, but if you only do one activity, then it may not have super strong core strength, or maybe you haven't worked on proprioception, which is, so that's the feedback, right, of knowing where your legs are in space. And the reason for making that, practicing that, and trails will do it, but concrete and roads won't, because it's flat. You don't get any feedback of like you've misstepped. So you need a little bit of corrective. Oh, I misstepped, to keep that system super sharp, if that makes sense. So part of like one of the pillars is proprioceptive feedback. Keep your dog on trails, for instance, because then as your dog ages as well, your older dog is far less likely to be misstepping. They're way more likely to actually have a really strong neurological system, and um, it helps their mobility, and it prevents them from tripping and misstepping and being clumsy. But the other core pillar that's a very important one is core strength. And you think, well, if they're running, you just need the legs to move. True for that part, but what the core does is it actually coordinates your legs moving. So if your core is weak, then there's poor compensation, like your gait just changes. And if suddenly the dog changes direction, it's your core that creates that and that allows that. So suddenly you've got a lot of smaller muscles that have to respond and change your dog's direction. So yeah, there are ways to increase your dog's core strength, and one of them being have them sit, give them a treat, and have them sit up on their haunches for a while. There's
Oh,
some examples on the website, but yeah, just to
yeah.
keep people in thinking, oh man, there are some little missing parts to my dog's fitness. And fitness, the reason I'm saying that is not, it's not like bingo where you win a prize if you have five, all taken care of. But the dog is far less likely to get injured if you've taken
Okay.
care of those. So
Yeah.
that's why. And for dogs that hop out of the basket, because you had asked about that, um, it depends on the size of the dog and how far the jump is. For my dog, she's a 20-pound travel edition. We're on a little folding bike. So the wheels are, we have a 12-inch diameter wheel and, no, sorry, 16. Yeah, that would be a super 3-year-old bike, a 16 and 20.
Yeah.
So and she's on the rear rack. So her basket, for her to hop in and out, the clearance, she's maybe 2 feet off the ground. So
Got
that's
it.
okay for her. So part of it is the distance. Part of it is how heavy and fat is your dog.
Yeah.
The other part is what are they landing? What sort of surface are they landing on? How hard is that from an impact standpoint? So for the same dog to hop out of the basket to land on grass, a very different experience for their body than landing on concrete or pavement or sidewalk, for instance. And so you just have to be a bit careful. And if you think of it for yourself, are you hopping off the hood of your car or you're hopping off the roof of your car? And that can often be what someone is asking their dog to do. So just be a bit cautious there. The
Yeah.
other thing I would add to that is if you're asking your dog to hop down, a harness is probably a very good idea rather than anything around the collar. Like to your point, if they hop out and suddenly it gets tight because the bike and the dog go in different directions, best that be the harness that takes that rather than something around their neck. And
Yeah.
then there are two types or two styles of harnesses. One is called restrictive and one is called non-restrictive. The difference being how much freedom is there for movement in the shoulders. And what a non-restrictive, which is ideally what you want, if you look at the front of it, it comes down like a V. And what that means is no point of the harness crosses over the front of the shoulder. Some
Okay.
of them, if you look at it, you'll see, oh, it's like it goes right over the front of the shoulder. And it means the dog's gait is probably going to change. It also means if you're asking it to do something that requires proper, sufficient shoulder extension and control, like hopping out of down from a basket on a bicycle, they may not be able to fully extend or normally extend. And so then you wonder, what's that doing to the tissues if they're compensating differently?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting as a cyclist, right? So, depending on how serious you get with cycling, there's a point where you're putting in all this time on the bike, and then you realize like, oh, my lower back really hurts when I climb. And so why is that? So then you start looking into that. Well, it's because your core is weak. So then you got to start working on your core. If you're going to be serious about cycling, you need to have a very strong core. So it does, make perfect sense, really. If you're going to ask your dog to do these things, then you want to make sure that the dog's core is strong. So yeah, I'm kind of envisioning maybe trying to get my doodles in the garage with me in the morning when I'm doing my core workout and see if I can get their core workout. I don't know if that's possible that both of us doing it at the same time, but I've certainly seen videos like that too, where somebody's doing yoga and their dog's sitting there, doing the yoga with the owner and stuff. It's pretty cool. But
Yeah. And
yeah, I mean,
wonderful
it
because
makes
now then
perfect
they're
sense.
both doing it, right? And they're both benefiting from it. But yeah, no, absolutely. If you can make it a routine with your dog to do these exercises, it helps a whole lot. So if people are nervous about having their dog jump down because they think that might be too high, then yeah, just help your dog down. There
Yeah.
shouldn't be a lot of urgency to having to do this, and maybe it takes a bit longer. And before River was used to doing that, or to be transparent, but before I had the guts to have her
Yeah.
jump down,
Yeah.
we'd just roll the bike up to a fence and I would lean it against the fence and I would get off and I'd go over to her and pick her up and put her on the ground. And then I'd get back on the bike and then she'd run beside me with the leash. And then over time, I got used to a system where she hopped out. But two tips on that if someone is training their dog, just to help set you up for success. Stuff for sure can go wrong, but just keep in mind how many times this is happening. Repetitive damage to shoulders, especially, happen with repetitive. It's called a repetitive injury for a reason. And so the more often something's repeated, the more chance there is of an injury. But the two big things would be to have a sort of command for your dog that says like, ready and then jump, or ready and then okay. Or in my case with River, I say wait and then okay. And by saying, the wait or the hold, you're cueing them up. So they're in the basket and they know, okay, they're going to only jump on command. That's an important one, right? So, oh, there's a command for this. So I won't just jump. I'm going to wait for the command. So the command is, okay, wait. And she's keen to get out, but she knows I said wait. What that does is it cues up her body and her brain. So now her brain can picture what she's about to do, which means her whole neuro setup is ready for this. If you surprise your dog and dump it, which might happen now and then, but that's not how I would suggest getting your dog out of, to learn to jump down. If
Yeah.
it's a surprise, they're not only is their body maybe not in a good position to land like upright and such, or land uniformly on its legs, maybe they land awkwardly, but their brain's not ready for this. So if you can imagine, when you're walking along and suddenly you're looking ahead and you don't see that there's a bit of a step, or maybe if you go into a store, like, oh, that it's the or you go to stand, maybe you get down from something and you didn't realize it, the step was longer than you thought it was. Like it was a higher step. That awkwardness of like suddenly, oh, that wasn't what I was expecting. You just don't want to create that with your dog. So that's where the wait, she's all queued up. And I say, okay. And then she hops down. And because it's a bungee, I slow down her her trajectory. I still let her take the trajectory. I don't change it. But as it gets close to the ground, then I just pull vertically to not stop her, but just reduce some of that impact by reducing her speed. Don't do it too aggressively, because if it's attached to a harness, that's more at the front end of the dog. So if you stop that before she reaches the ground, her back end will just dump. And then suddenly it's that surprise of like, oh, my back end was not ready to be the one hitting the ground. So I learned that the hard way by trying to be too protective of her, and then her back end just slammed into the ground.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, yeah, that's kind of a big move, for the dog. And so you want to take your time with it. And one of the things too, like when we first got our dogs, I felt like my son was so anxious to take him mountain biking with him. And we have this trail system out by us, and it's mostly these downhill trails that are really fast and like I don't even like riding them, but I'm old, but he loves these trails. And so he took Cash out on the trails, and he did good, but he also tore one of his paw pads. And I think there's a little bit of a mindset there. I think there's a couple different types of dog owners, right? The one dog owner is going to be like, uh, this is all about my dog. We're going to go on a bike ride and it's all about my dog. I want to make sure my dog is like safe and happy. And, we're going to try to have this experience together. But anything I want to do is going to be completely secondary to what the dog
Mhm.
is comfortable with. And then there's the other one where, you're excited and you want to, you want the viral video dog right out of the gate, and it just doesn't happen overnight. So I think the thing that should really take precedent over anything that you're trying to achieve with a dog is really just trying to make it a great experience for the dog for the first time. Even if that means that you're planning on doing this 10-mile ride, maybe you end up doing a 2-mile ride because there's stuff you're dealing with that you just didn't account for, and your dog is in need of something different than what you had planned. And yeah, so I think that's probably a pretty important mindset. And maybe you can get there. I'm sure there's certain breeds that are better at, running trail than other breeds. I certainly can't even picture my cockapoos running down a downhill trail, but the doodles, certainly they can handle it, and they can run, they run really fast, and they can handle the terrain, it seems like, a lot better. But I think really just making it all about the dog for for a period of time while you're trying to get your dog up